Hello and welcome to episode 94 of The Garden Log with me, Ben Dark. I am a gardener and you are listening to a gardening podcast. Today coming to you from a squally day at the end of January 2022. It's quite dramatic here. I'm sitting upstairs and looking out of the window on my left at all the seagulls being battered about by the climactic conditions. They look like birds in the grip of the kind of turbulence you get in an aeroplane. They're flying along and suddenly it seems as if a great invisible palm has been pressed upon their back and shoved them downwards. And then the hand has swiped in front of them and dragged them in their wake, and they go skewing off diagonally. The poor little things. They're the nice seagulls as well, those silent and elegant types. It's very good sitting near the window weather. I don't know if you'll be able to hear the outside on this recording. I doubt it. But there's all of this gusting, booming going on. That kind of noise you get when a gale sneaks its way into a building site and lifts up a bit of corrugated iron and makes it do that fish flopping, or a bit of tarpauling slapping against itself like the end of a bullwhip. It's very good. And all of the rain is occasionally dashing against the window, and each time it does so from a different direction, as if we're on a passenger ferry by those big glass windows, getting rolled and tossed in the English Channel. Very good indeed. I wish you were here to see it. Today's podcast doesn't focus on this wet weather. It's about a stiller, snowier trip to Copenhagen Botanical Gardens that I made a few days ago, and about a session I spent sowing seeds in the sort of low, sideways sunlight of a Danish afternoon. Also, and almost most importantly, it's about some of the most exciting news of the last few years, and that is the announcement of the imminent publication of my book. My beautiful book. I'm finally able to make mention of it publicly. It is a sort of spiritual ally of the garden log. All the discursive nature of the garden log, all of the plants and history and description, sort of captured in a bottle and made somehow inky and tipped out onto the page for people to read. It's called The Grove, a nature odyssey in 19.5 front gardens. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about it at the end of this podcast. But that's not for now. Now is for more practical matters. So let's talk about some real compost black-fingered seed sowing business as we head into the week in gardening. I began this week by planting some seeds that I hope will germinate indoors on a cool windowsill in preparation for being moved outside later. It's quite exciting to be planting on a large scale because in my professional horticultural career, there hasn't been much time for seed sowing. It's a brilliant way to get plants, but not a particularly efficient use of a gardener's time in a small-scale operation. It takes a lot of tending and caring and fiddling about when you can just jump in a huge van and head down to a wholesale nursery for plants that don't need to be pricked out and thinned and worried about damping off. But here I am able to indulge myself. And it's a fraught business because you never really know if it's going to come good, if your seed sowing has worked. It's a bit like baking a cake. You don't know if the rise is going to happen when you put it in the oven. Except it's baking a cake where you only get a chance to refine your recipe once a year. When you talk to someone who says, well, I find the trick with X seed is to do Y, then you know you are talking to a person who has suffered through disappointing springs of plenty and come out the other side. So I must say that all of these plants that I'm going to lovingly describe to you come with the caveat that they might exist only in my head. They're sort of Schrödinger plants at the moment, both plants and not plants. The first group of seeds I planted are the ones that I can be most confident in coming up. Actually, none of these seeds are particularly hard work. None of them require cold stratification or chitting or soaking in water. They're all pretty basic. Put them in the soil. Not too deep kind of plants. Not too deep, by the way, is the key. Not too deep is the thing that beginner gardeners don't seem to realise. I think they're ruined by school time experiments in acorn planting. Everyone find an acorn and plant it in your pot, and soon we will have a tree. Because, of course, acorns have their own survival ration. They're designed to be buried deep by jays and other things that hop and fly and scurry. They're designed to get shoved down into the ground and have enough resources to push their way out. But most plants, my Linaria, my little seeds like that, they're not designed to go deep under the ground. If anyone does that, they're mad. I remember carrying out a sort of post-mortem on a friend's pot of basil, and he was wondering why on earth no basil was coming up. He'd bought fresh seed, he'd used seed from last year, he'd gone out and tried a different brand of seed, and we poked around in the pot, and I said, well, where are these tiny little dots? I can't see them. And they were about halfway down the pot, about 4 inches under the soil. And you think, well, that's no use. We need one of those Chilean miner style rescue operations just to reach the things alive. It's never going to work. Anyway, the first group of seeds I planted are the easiest to germinate. I really don't doubt that we will see some plants from that. And they are the little French marigolds, the Tagetes patula. French marigolds, of course, coming from Mexico. They're nice seeds. They're very long and sort of bicolor. Half of them are black, or slightly over half of them, and half of them are white. They're the little ends that are designed to catch the air. They always look to me like one of those drum brushes that jazz drummers use. Have you ever gone to see a jazz drummer in a quiet little trio or something, and they're using a black handled thing with a load of thin wires coming out of it to add scratch to their beats and swirl on the snare drum and shing, shing, shing over the cymbals? They look exactly like that. They're settled into the soil, and I'm sure we will see them soon. And once they're here in this garden, on the edge of the pot borders or just plopping around in the pots, then we can have them here forever, because they are so easy to collect seeds from. It's actually a theme of all these seeds that I'm planting. They're easy ones to get hold of. They're stuff that's been gathered by friends or by myself. So the next one is Lychnis coronaria, a firm favourite, one from the garden in London. That's the little plant with the glaucous, almost lamb's ear coloured leaves and the upward facing magenta flowers. You might know it as rose campion. I'm hoping it's going to be happy here and move around all over the place. In previous gardens, it likes bare patches in the lawn. It likes bits that have been worn dry by over-treading or overzealous sunbathing, or even shaded out by another plant, which is then cut back, and then the Lychnis will germinate there so happily, but not particularly in a rich and mulched flower bed. So I scattered some of this seed on the rough lawn as well, and I'll just keep my eyes open for those pale leaves coming out amongst all of the other broad-leafed lawn weeds. Because the colour is so different, caused by all those white hairs, they're really easy to spot and lift out with the end of a knife and put where you want to. So I've got some of those down on the lawn, slightly unconventionally, and others in trays on the windowsill. Alongside them, I've got the large seeds of Linaria annua planted, and that's honesty, that plant in the Brassica family, with typically mustardy leaves and the Brassica cruciform flowers that they have. I've planted the white version, which is because that's what I had available, and because I quite like the way it brightens dark places. You can grow this plant in the shade, in the semi-shade under the trees, so it's quite good to lighten dark corners. And the white works well with the leaves. The rose campion that I was just talking about has a white form, which I really dislike. I think that it wastes the glaucous leaves to have a white crown of flowers over the top. It gives the whole thing the look of an overexposed photograph, as if someone skewed the colour balance with a clumsy thumb. So that one's not one I'd recommend, but the white form of honesty, it is a lovely thing for having those flashes of corner lightning brightness. The next plant I went for is Eupatorium maculatum, which I think that American listeners particularly will know as Joe Pye weed. It's a good big taller than me perennial with masses of seed heads that look like sort of dawn clouds being bashed by those first sideways rays of the morning. The variety that I planted is the Atropurpureum variety, and Atropurpureum has the pure purple internodes. Most Eupatorium has a spotted internode, a spotted stem, but the Atropurpureum one has pure purple internodes. Look very, very good when you catch them on camera in the early morning light. These ones were the most fun to do. I was sowing my seeds outside just so that the bits of compost and everything else that fly out of the sides of the tray could be brushed into the lawn with a brush. And the tiniest breeze picks up these little things. They're like a cloud of midges in the summer air, and they go whoosh off wherever they want to. So my other seed trays, which were loitering nearby, might be producing some Eupatorium as well. We never know. This is the plant I'm most doubtful about. Not about its germination, more about its suitability for this garden. It's a plant that quite likes it wet, quite likes almost marshland. And we're on a coastal sand kind of garden here in Copenhagen. So it might be almost unfair on this plant to put it in, but I'm going to try anyway. And lastly, I planted Rhodium maniscavii, which is a little stalkspill. More magenta flowers, I'm afraid. More of the pink tones. Thank goodness for that white honesty. It's got little geranium-like flowers, hardy geranium-like flowers. It's very closely related to those, but it comes above a mass of quite deeply divided leaves. They look more like the leaves you get above a typical geum, for example, than those palmate hardy geraniums we normally see. I've planted this because it's a classic cold country doer. It's grown across Scandinavia. They grow it in Iceland. It's from the high passes, the snow-covered passes of the Pyrenees. And I've planted it because if we get an old-fashioned winter is what the Danes keep telling me, we should, if you'd been here in the old-fashioned winters, you wouldn't be looking so cheerful, my laddie. You wouldn't be saying, the weather's fine here, my laddie, then you'd be suffering. And if we get one of those, then this one should hopefully survive. It's also like most of those halfway up mountain plants, a little thing that can take really sharp drainage. So if the towering 2 meters of Joe Pye weed fails to materialize, then I can take some comfort in this little scrubby scrabbler around my knees instead. And that was it for my seed sowing. They're all behind me on the windowsill now, just on the other side of that rain-lashed glass that I was talking about. Hopefully they're benefiting from this podcast recording. maybe the sound of my voice will stimulate them to come up and see what on earth is going on out here. The other big event of the week was my trip to Copenhagen Botanical Gardens, a trip that I spent entirely in their rock garden area. Again, looking for inspiration for a dry, quick draining soil. I staggered about the place looking for interesting plants that seemed to be growing particularly well in the middle of winter. My first superstar plant I found was a Cotoneaster cashmeriensis, which was cascading down some rocks in full leaf and berry, looking like it did not care that December is a month gone and we are well into a new year. It was still wearing its Christmas regalia, still dark green of leaf and bright red of berry. It's better, I think, than Cotoneaster horizontalis, with which it shares a similar growth habit, because at this stage of year, Cotoneaster horizontalis is bare and denuded. And yes, you get the lovely herringbone pattern, but that's really for the hardcore fans that get up close and examine, and everyone appreciates a bit of red and green at this time of year. I also found, growing nearby to that, some Opuntia pottsii, which is a cactus in the snow. This trip, by the way, took place with a carpet of face-scouring snow-hail mixture. In the photos, which I'm going to put onto Instagram and into the private Facebook group, it looks like a beautiful soft carpet, but actually cycling through it to reach the garden was like some sort of cryogenic exfoliation treatment. Very unpleasant indeed. And this Opuntia pottsii was sitting there looking as miserable as I had felt when I was on my bicycle at the indignity of all this frozen water. It's a prickly pear cactus, one of those classic little spiky paddles coming up from the ground. And it's pretty used to snow. It's from the mountainous parts of Arizona and New Mexico, so it would expect to get a little bit of a covering. Here is rather more damp than Arizona. And I think that it was surviving just because the mountainous landscape that they'd created for it in the botanical gardens was so perfectly dry at the ground. I also saw some wonderful Picea glauca, the Conica cultivar. That's the little juvenile foliaged version of the white spruce. The white spruce, that big, rather bare canopied tree from Minnesota and Wisconsin and those other hard-growing parts of North America, which tends to lose all its leaves. So it looks like the end of an arrow, a bare shaft, and then a little pointy tree right on the top. But the Conica cultivar is completely different because it's got this juvenile growth. The needle is the length that you would see on a seedling in its first summer, but held for the lifetime of the plant. It grows incredibly slowly and incredibly densely. It almost looks like some sort of rock formation itself. And this looked fantastic, dusted in the snow. There's a little bit of reversion, I notice, on one of the three sentinel plants, where the unstable mutation that is shared by all of these Conica clones has reverted back to adult leaves. And unless those Copenhagen gardeners come and cut that out, suddenly a normal white pine will leap forward. It's quite exciting to see a real-life danger like that, a horticultural catastrophe in potential slow motion. I think they'll get it. They seem like a pretty able bunch down there at the Copenhagen Botanical Gardens. Certainly I was very impressed with the quality of everything they were growing. There are also a couple of trees that I really liked. A fantastic Sorbus alnifolia, that's the Korean mountain ash. They have a good one by the Japanese gateway at Kew. And it's a lovely plant in summer with nice serrated leaves, ulnus type leaves. So leaves serrated like the alder tree, like it says in the name, Sorbus alnifolia, and white flowers. But the best of the plant is saved for this late winter time because it retains its berries And now they have been slowly crumpling and wrinkling and losing a bit of their saturation. So the colour of the stain you get when you leave a glass of red wine to make a ring on a sheet of white paper, that faded, washed out watercolour. And from a distance, the whole tree's canopy looks like one of those deep pink, black-leaf cherry cultivars in the final moments, but before the buds open. Really nice to see. The other good tree was an Ostrea virginiana, which is the hop hornbeam. And that grows big and beech-like and spreading, but it is far more fully morescent than the beech. That means it's more likely to retain its dried leaves. It retains them on the mature canopy, not just on the hedge juvenile form, like a beech tree. And it also has the sort of typical straining trunk that you see on a hornbeam tree. It looks like a weightlifter's neck if you catch them in the middle of a deadlift, all straining at itself. So I stood under that for a while as this harsh snow came down and listened to it all chinkle through the dried leaves above me. It was a really, really wonderful, magical, sort of fairy tale sound. You could have sold it to someone making a remake of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe as Snow Queen music. And after standing under the tree for a while, I left the botanical garden and went home to make my very important social media announcement about the new book. And I doubt it will come as much of a surprise to the listeners that is my recommendation for this week. So we will hear a little bit of traditional garden log music and then a little bit more about the Grove. So thank you for making it this far through the episode and this far through the Garden Log's lifetime. Here is the hard sell that we've been building up to for 4 years' time. I have a book coming out, a book about history and plants, as you'd expect, about being a gardener, but mainly about looking at gardens. The aim of the book is to see the entire world from a single, fairly ordinary pavement. So I set it over a year on a London street, and each chapter is basically a shrub or tree or flower from one of the gardens that I passed every day when walking my little son home from his nursery. And so I see a plant, a camellia or a buddleia, and I go into the depths of its beauty and how it grows and its strange hinterlands. And some of it's very personal, and some of it is slightly humorous. And it's basically about how exciting it is to look at the world and the life that surrounds us. The street itself is down in Camberwell, but the book takes us everywhere. It takes us to battlefields and spy bunkers and Sissinghurst and America in its first years of life and everywhere else really that I can think of or that I might have tangentially touched upon in these episodes over the last few years. I had an awful lot of fun writing it, as you can well imagine, and an awful lot of support to basically do what I liked, which was really nice to go in the various directions that I wanted to go in, to explore the stranger aspects of a seemingly ordinary street and the plants that dwell there. It's also got some fantastic pen and ink illustrations by a very talented artist named Skavula Gordon, who also did a brilliant, bright, enticing, come and buy me style cover for the book. So I'm hoping that if this sell was not enough and you stumble across it on some bookseller's table somewhere, then her bright colours will entice you in. And you'll say, "Ah, right. Oh, that's what he was talking about. Now I shall go and buy it." For those of you who need less enticement, you can pre-order it now. And I'm going to go and put a link at the bottom of this podcast description for you to find a suitable place to do so. You can also obviously go into your local independent bookshop and say, "There's a book coming out by a chap called Ben Dark, and I'd like a copy. And I suspect many of your other customers would like a copy as well." And the bookseller will say, "Oh, great, I hadn't heard of it. I'll look into that and perhaps order one for you and one for the shop." And thus, slowly, I will begin to take over the non-fiction bestseller charts. So that's The Grove, a nature odyssey in 19.5 front gardens. And that's going to come out on the 7th of April. There are also likely to be some live events surrounding that, some chances to come and hear me speak about the book and gardening and life in general. So it'll be a really nice opportunity, I hope, to meet some of you in person and say hello. In terms of this podcast, I'm hoping to carry on recording more regularly now the book is done and out of the way. And one of the things that I'd like to reinstate is the horticultural conundrums section. The part of the podcast where the listener writes in with a dilemma they might have, or perhaps even not a dilemma, something interesting they've seen, some particular moment of beauty in their own garden or another garden they might have passed. So more of a correspondence and problem solving. So if anyone has something they'd like to contribute for an episode in a month or so's time, then please do send me an email or a question to thegardenlogpodcast@gmail.com. And follow me on Instagram to see some pictures of the plants I've been describing today. Or you can request to join the private Facebook group and see them on there. It's been a great joy talking to you today while the wind hurled itself against the panes outside. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you manage to stay fairly warm and dry, and that the wind does not lift anything you don't want lifted or rattle anything you don't want rattled. Until next week, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.